Hello and good afternoon, everyone. At the risk of sounding like an annoying teacher, if I could request everyone to come a bit forward. And a very warm welcome to everyone in the room and everybody that is joining us on the line. On behalf of the World Economic Forum, the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, and of course the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we welcome you to this discussion on circular trade facilitation. Even in its abridged form, it's quite a mouthful, so I'm hoping that our fantastic panel will help us unpack the concept a little bit, because it remains quite on the frontier. We have today Minister Ville Tavio from the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, my colleague Philippe Isler, who is Director of Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, and Ms. Mariam Al-Mansouri, who is General Manager at Rebound Plastic, which is quite on the cutting edge of a circular economy for plastics. The format is going to be quite conversational between myself and our panelists. And at times, I'll also open it up to the audience to join us in sharing some of your insights, not least because I already see a lot of you experts sitting amidst us. To start, most of us here are aware that trade can be an effective enabler in the circular economy, which can then in turn lead to faster decarbonization and better nature preservation. However, governments and businesses, and I do not need to tell you this as you're better aware, still continue to face formidable barriers to move towards sustainable circularity. Then again, trade-related measures and trade facilitation in particular, think customs, can help foster efficient circular logistics. Now, I'm going to stop there for a second and take a step back. Circular logistics helps to think about anything in terms of a supply chain for goods that you have already used, that are fit to be used again or processed again, or safely disposed. As it stands, not every region of the world has the capabilities to process this or to put this back to the market in a productive way. So we need some sort of regulated and safe cross-border movement. That's where I'll stop and turn over to Minister Tavio, not least because Finland has been one of the forerunners in the circular economy. I would really like to know, Minister Tavio, what types of cooperation would you like to see with your trade partners on the circular economy?
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here with you today. It's a great topic and something that Finland has been working a lot for. Okay, thank you. It was well, nice to be here once again. It's of course most important for us to have sustainability of the companies globally operating on a better level, and that these sustainable products would be competitive in the market. And this is of course a bit of a tragedy of our time and has been for some while if products with a short lifespan and like a single usable products are more cheaper and more competitive. But when we are going further into the future, we understand that our natural resources are diminishing and getting more raw. So it's going to be even more crucial to have them recycled better. So circular economy is, I think, a concept that we've been working with in Finland quite closely in the state level for around 10 years. And we were the first country in the world to do a circular economy roadmap in 2016. I was representing MP of the government at that time actually, but then 6 years in the opposition and now back in the government. I think this is a circular economy is a great umbrella also covering different types of models where you have the recyclability of a product, but then of course the quality of the materials, the sustainability of the materials, and then I'd like to think of the whole lifespan, whole life circle of a product, like I mentioned. But I'm sure it can be actually many other things which the experts know better. But as we move towards the more sustainable products, we create new companies and we create new trades. So that's why here in WTO meeting, it's a great time to remind ourselves that this trade on sustainable circulable products can be done much better, and there's lots work to do to trade them more efficiently, and also creation of standards so that it would be noted that the importance of the product quality would be noted in all the trade also. I think we are, as you are asking, what can we do in terms of trade, and perhaps the recognition of the issue is still quite important. It's the first phase, and already it's widely discussed in the Western world, and I would say also in the developing economies. But somehow to combine these two markets is our goal at the moment, and definitely trade policies will play a key role in this.
Thanks a lot, Minister. And I think you set it up really nicely in terms of bringing in new companies and new markets into the discussion. And that makes me turn to my colleague on the left. Mariam, you lead a very cutting-edge company that has managed to put recycled plastic business-to-business interactions at a new level. We are really eager to know how you do it, but also maybe you could share some insights on how you manage to move and operate in 60-plus countries, many of whom are developing countries, and how do you deal with the challenges of cross-border movement of recycled plastic?
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. In terms of reflecting on what His Excellency just said and looking at circular trade in general, there is one dominant regulation challenge which we face continuously, at least in recycled plastics, but I'm sure across all other materials, is when a material moves from one border to another, customs are not very well informed or trained, because at the end of the day, this is not their line of expertise, to know if a monolayer or multiple layer packaging is safe for recycling. Does his own home country have the capacity to absorb this material and reprocess it? Mainly because on a B2B trade today, the end user is not verified. What we bring to the table as Rebound is we vet and verify both users. So we ensure that the recycler is actually a recycler and practices based on international standards. And then from a buyer perspective, we make sure that that buyer has the capacity to treat whatever material is flowing in. One challenge with obtaining or enabling and empowering circular economies is the form in which materials are traded. So today, most of the start to a circular economy is baled materials. And under the Basel Convention and other international regulations, raw bottles, raw clothes, raw electronic equipments can be categorized as hazardous. And even if they're not, customs are very reluctant to let it flow into the border. And that's why we have a lot of water pollution today, because no one is going to bear the cost of taking the material back to the original country, and so a lot of illegal dumping takes place. So that is maybe how I would reflect on one of the challenges when it comes to moving materials across borders and circular economy in general. But the opportunity is really what is interesting. If we talk about recycled commodity plastics, so our day-to-day plastics, the market size is expected to reach $46 billion next year. And then if we look at engineering plastics, so the plastics that are used in our cars, in fishing nets, and certain components, that market size is at least triple the commodity plastics as well. And so how can we utilize these untapped economies to benefit, but also ensure the quality, which also His Excellency mentioned in terms of the quality of the recyclates, understanding which material is good and can be recycled into a similar material, and which kind of products should we redesign, rethink, and stick to an innovative way of maybe sticking to one type of plastic or glass or aluminum used rather than multi-packaged, multi-layered packaging, or also embracing the new technologies out there or additives. A lot of the chemical companies today are coming up with additives that can clean materials better, remove odor, remove colors. And so there's a lot of promising new technologies and new companies, which I think His Excellency was referring to, but also capturing the market size is important, and that's only possible through trade.
Thanks a lot, Mariam, and that was quite inspiring, and I do hope it makes to the negotiators that are also hammering out a global plastics treaty, partly in Nairobi at the UNEA 6 right now, and also later this year in Ottawa. And you mentioned something quite interesting, that is customs officials in many of these developing countries that are your markets are not always best placed to understand the products that are coming in. And this makes me, I really have to turn to the expert here, Philippe Isler. Could you tell us, Philippe, how do you see trade facilitation interact with circular economy now that it's starting to get more policy priority?
Thank you, Jeeves, and thank you very much for inviting me today. I hope the mic is working. You can hear me. Now it's working. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I'm not an expert in circular economy. I'm learning. You can call me an expert in trade facilitation, but circular economy, not yet. Maybe if you allow me just to give you a little bit of context where we come from. We are a public-private partnership that was established in 2016. We are operated by the World Economic Forum, the ICC, the Center for International Private Enterprise in the US, and GIZ, the German Development Agency. We're not a legal entity. We are, the best way to describe it is a consortium of organizations, both public and private. We work with about 40 to 50 multinational companies around the world and about 500 SMEs around the world. And our sole objective is to remove obstacles to trade in the developing world. In fact, from a technical standpoint, we were established to assist implementing the trade facilitation agreement. But as we all know, the world of trade has evolved tremendously over the past 7 or 8 years, of course. And whilst the TFA is obviously still very relevant in terms of implementation, we are being asked more and more by our donors, United States, Canada, Germany, to start looking at the intersection between trade facilitation and some of the new themes that are emerging, whether it's global health, whether it's disaster preparedness, or in fact, whether it's about the environment. And so we have been thinking very hard about this and to say, our expertise is in trade facilitation. How can we provide some added benefit for the climate cause? And of course, you can digitalize and remove the number of papers around. That's one way to do it. You can reduce the emissions coming from trucks at ports, but that's, I would say, level 0. And we're thinking, look, let's be a little bit more creative here. And this is where we've been starting to talk to the private sector and to say, what are some of the issues out there? And very quickly, also with the help from the work that the World Economic Forum is doing, it became apparent that circular economy was one area that was, I wouldn't say ignored, but that for which there is not much a focus yet as far as establishing what we call reverse supply chains. And we thought, okay, that's an interesting area to look at and to say, okay, well, what are the domains in terms of circular economy that we need to look at? And yes, there's textiles, there's plastics, and then there's electronic waste. We thought, since we're not experts in circular economy, plastics is a very complex environment. Let's try and start with an area where we feel that we can make some progress. And so what we did is we started discussing with the tech industry about what is the situation with electronic waste. And we started working with Apple, with Cisco, with Amazon Web Services, with Hewlett-Packard, And they are, of course, in a situation now where they are under pressure to be able to find ways of making sure that their products are recycled. And as I mentioned, the actual process of getting goods or getting this waste from the developing world back into countries where there is recycling facilities is basically non-existent. Even with the best of will, so you have certain countries identified on the African continent, places like Namibia, Botswana, where there is a willingness to actually collate some of the used electronic equipment and send them back to countries where there's recycling plants. To the minister's point, they're unable to do it because customs don't want to touch this, the logistics providers do not want to touch this, and what you find is a situation where this equipment, in the worst case, is ending up in landfills in horrible conditions. And if you think about electronic waste, some of the chemicals that are in there, whether it's lead, cadmium, dioxins, arsenic, mercury, all of this stuff is not terribly good for the environment or for health in general. I was looking at some statistics. I mean, 50 million tons per year of electronic waste is being produced. That's equivalent to 1,000 laptops a second. And I think what we're dealing with here is a time bomb. People are not realizing yet what this actually means. And as part of our mandate, we are asked to think a little bit ahead and sort of see how we can help. And so we've been working with the tech industry. And looking at, I think the Basel Convention was mentioned. How can we somehow contribute to digitalizing some of the Basel Convention requirements, and particularly the PIC process, for those of you who are familiar with that prior informed consent process. And what we found is that there is one part of the world where there is potentially a great opportunity for a pilot, and that is the Pacific. And the reason for that is because the Pacific region has established what's called the Waigeni Convention, which is a spin-off from the Basel Convention, and in fact caters for some of this. In the region, you also have Australia and New Zealand that have got the recycling capability, and further up, of course, you have South Korea and Malaysia, etc. And we've developed a concept to see to what extent we could put in place a pilot. And the companies, the industry companies that we've been working with, in fact, have put together a pilot, an IT system, a pilot IT system to try this out. So today we are in discussion with the US government, with USAID. It looks like we will be able to get some funding for that. And really it's, a start of a process for us to try and contribute to this. And of course, if we are somehow successful with electronic waste, and plastics obviously is the next step. But we have to start somewhere. And of course, in the audience, if there's any government or private sector who are interested in contributing, we're more than happy to discuss.
Thanks a lot, Philippe, and wish you all the best in that project as well. It really does sound it can move a lot of weight around. And I'm very tempted to, because we've moved into e-waste and it's really a ticking time bomb, like Philippe just mentioned. I do see some experts in the room who might be able to elaborate a little bit more in terms of the challenges that equipment managers face or equipment manufacturers face in terms of interacting with reverse supply chains for electronics. Maybe if anyone would like to contribute your own experience in e-waste management or getting your products back into the supply chain, I think we could do a quick insight sharing in the room. Yeah, please.
I am Amy Burke with HP, and Philippe, thank you, Amy Burke with HP. Philippe, you're very resonating with the points you're making about some of the challenges of getting those products back into a reverse supply chain, something very real that we face every day. A lot of we design for sustainability, but a lot of the recycling that we do is done in the country where it's consumed. So then, of course, that brings up the point in terms of the capacity of developing countries. One of the things we'd really like to see, and since we're here at the WTO, is how can we make it easier to move products around for refurbishment And we think that's a really great opportunity. It's something that we're increasingly seeing from our customers wanting to have refurbished products. And it helps us to create kind of more of a closed loop system. So just really encourage some of the work that's being done in different multilateral fora, whether it's WTO and kind of a trade facilitation for reverse supply chains, or through the WCO with some of the work on the HS codes. And then, of course, all of the work around plastics, all very important, but it's also very important that they all speak to each other so that we can really get to circularity at scale in those reverse supply chains. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take one more comment from the audience, and then I'll turn back to my to my panel. Please do introduce yourself at the beginning.
I'm Pradeep Mehta, head of CUTS, is a global NGO working on a variety of plethora of issues, including this. Now, one of the things we are principally a consumer organization, but have been working on public policy space for a long time. Now, one of the things that we've done in India is to pass a Right to Repair Act, which is very critical in terms of the circular economy, that you don't have to, manufacturers nowadays are turning out equipment with very limited life and no spare parts. So under the Right to Repair Act, it would be necessary for manufacturers to be able to provide the spare parts and so that the service is longer. Now, in the context of circular trade facilitation, this becomes very important to understand as to how the economy is going to function when you are not building up consumption unnecessarily, which is extremely important for circular economy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mehta, for sharing the point on consumption. And both of our speakers from the audience, as well as the previous panelists, brought up the point of including developing countries in reverse supply chains. And if circular economy discussions are not mainstreamed yet, the intersection between development and circular economy is further tenuous. So maybe, Minister, you could tell us how you think development and trade cooperation could work together to address this and create circular competitiveness, if I may coin that word.
Thank you. First of all, if I just may briefly comment, I think it's interesting to hear from the HP's perspective on the more sustainable materials, and this is something that somehow as a consumer you might take as a granted that it's already quite done, but I know the process is still kind of on its way. So that's definitely right way to move forward, and the India's enabling the repairs is quite an interesting perspective, an important one, and yet I maybe from my point of view these have to be done quite free market based. I think one of the most important points that I usually try to make is that to be able to have sustainable markets, you need to have competitive sustainable products. So they have to be affordable, and the companies need to be competitive. And I don't think it can be done simply by doing more legislation where you kind of limit or try to make, because this is something that we see happening in the Western world as well, where you always make a new standard and then make it like strict. I know it might be useful in many cases, but in the end, if you want these products to be global, I think it's important to have these standards work in those terms that they make the product more effective, or they make the value chain of these products more effective. And it would kind of make sense if you think of these raw materials that we are discussing here. Like metals will be quite valuable after they are, it's get more, because of inflation, it's more expensive to mine them, and they get more rare. So eventually they will run out, but I don't know what's gonna happen first. We have many issues always, many threats in the world, but of course the fight of the raw materials is a current issue. We can see we are facing it in many political sectors. Now you were asking from the point of view of developed development policies and through Finland's development cooperation. First of all, the meaning of the purpose of development from Finland to cooperation with the developing countries is to develop them, meaning that we want to reduce the poverty and we want to reduce the inequality of men and women, for example. So we want to do we have a basic task there, but the challenge we have is how to do this also sustainable way. And we can see that we have the SDG goals, and then we can see that there are actually quite many links to circular economies. So in terms of reducing carbon emissions or having these value chains more sustainable. And we can certainly, from our point of view, we can see that we do so-called aid for trade support, where we are trying to have these circular value chains integrated in the developing countries. We do it with many organizations, UNIDOS, which is one that connects large companies with the smaller ones and works like those areas that Philip mentioned also here, textile, plastic, ICT sectors. Those are quite clear focuses. But each country is unique, so we have to work from bottom up so that we find those possibilities for them to create their own circular economy. And we recommend every state to make a circular economy map where they try to identify the areas where they can have the fastest process. We also use our trust economy trust funds, and we have one, for example, with the African Development Bank, in Africa we do it fund-wise. And that's, of course, always someone who is dealing development issues daily. That's always quite a basis to have all the different kind of funds, and then seeing if you can kind of like integrate circular economy into these funds. So this development policies is definitely a good place to start, and I hope Finland can show the way on its part. Thank you.
Sustainable Development Goal 12 deals with this whole issue, responsible production and consumption. Sustainable Development Goal 12.
12, yeah. And also climate, but also maybe, yes, that's directly, yes, yeah. I believe you, yeah.
Thank you, Minister, for showing the light on Finland's various funds and the way that you see countries interacting with development and circularity, and we really hope more countries can take it forward in that constructive way. But you also mentioned the need to look at several different material streams, and this was also something that was echoed by other speakers. Plastics is probably a bit of a saturated area right now in terms of how much intellectual resources are being poured in whenever we talked about circular economy, and that is a good thing. That has led to a lot of good outcomes, has led to a lot of good intelligence coming out. And as someone that is working around developing and contributing to that intelligence, Mariam, how do you see that drawing and contributing lessons for other material streams like textiles or ICT?
Thank you for the question. So plastics make up everything around us at the end of the day, whether it's, the cloth, the microphone, our clothes, our phones. Again, when it comes to economies are based on materials, and studying each material is very important, and then reflecting on its circularity from a government perspective is also crucial. I used to work for the Cabinet of Ministers, and maybe that's where a lot of my public thinking comes in. Standards, harmonizing, whether it's plastics, textiles, metals, aluminum, used cooking oil, looking at the problematic materials which are essential maybe in sectors such as healthcare or aerospace engineering. And, we can't get rid of them, but we don't want to dump them. So maybe advance recycle them in a more of a pyrolysis manner or liquefaction manner. But dealing with each material is very important, but it's also important to know that one country cannot deal with all of its material. And when we talk about circularity, and as the minister pointed out, knowing what each country's infrastructure and capacity is capable of doing, this is where regional power comes in. When we launched our platform, for instance, back in 2022 in September, it's a global marketplace. So today when you enter, you can interact between, just different horizons. In the next few months, we're actually going to tweak it. We're going to make our marketplaces more regional. The reason for that is not only because it will improve price transparency and neutralize the purchasing powers of both the private sector, but also looking and reflecting on policies for incentives or subsidies. But it also brings together the similar quality of materials. So for instance, our water bottles in the UAE are different than the water bottles that you'll find in Indonesia versus in India. And going back to plastics versus other materials, it's going to be, again, regional synergies, because if we try to recycle everything, we will use a lot of land, a lot of water, a lot of energy, and we do not want to do that. Maybe every country can at least flake and shred materials at the minimum, and then those materials can move, because under the Basel Convention, a lot of flakes fall under B3011, which resonates to the non-hazardous materials which can move. Repurposing, so if we cannot do cradle to cradle, can we inject these materials in things like furniture, panels, etc. But also realizing that although at the top we are trying to innovate, research, put in standards, policies, etc., we also need to acknowledge that a lot of circular systems or aggregation and collection happens at an informal scale, an informal sector. In a lot of countries, not just in the East, but also certain countries on the other side, women are involved in collecting materials, be it plastic, be it textile, the random components that we would find in landfill. And so we cannot put them out of a job unless we have ensured that they transition into a more formalized sector, making it cheaper on the consumer to give back and enter that reverse supply chain, but then also noting that sometimes it is not the consumers that will bring back the materials, it's the informal sector. And that is something that maybe a lot of policies today do not include, and it should be included. Only then can we make sure that the market sizes which we want to reach can be attained without harming the men and women and other individuals participating in collection.
Thanks a lot, Mariam. I think that was a very solid answer, and you packed in a lot of different concepts. I'm just going to try to summarize very quickly for my benefit going forward. No, not at all. You talked about regionalizing of some of the standards to move towards larger economies of scale. You talked about some sort of a tiered approach in terms of what is most easily recyclable versus higher order circular economy approaches like repurposing, for example. And of course, in the vein of the ministers and the audience insights on sustainable development goals, gender, social inclusion continue to be very not mainstreamed in the discussions, although in the plastics context, that is starting to see the light of the day, how we could also extend that to other material streams. Thanks a lot. Turning to you, Philippe, I'm aware that you have led a lot of successful trade facilitation programs in developing countries, bringing together both public entities, governments, as well as the private sector. This time around, when we talk about sustainable customs or even circular customs, how do you see these two entities interacting? Is it any different, or is it the same sort of cooperation in a different light?
Yeah, thanks, Jeet. Just before I get to that, just a couple of comments. I think the gentleman from India here made a very good point, is that the consumer attitude is extremely important in all of this. I mean, we often say, right, the most environmental car out there is the car that you don't buy. And I think there's definitely an element of that as well. And also, in terms of refurbishment, we have an interesting story. With the Alliance, we organized a hackathon in Kenya a few years back, bringing people from the continent to discuss these issues in practical ways. And what was interesting is that the prize was a refurbished laptop. And it's a team from Morocco who won the prize. And so we sent by courier the laptop to Morocco, and it got stuck in customs for 6 weeks because, because the question was, from a valuation perspective, either it's new and you've got to pay duty on the new, or it's refurbished, in which case it's waste, right? And that's just so illustrative, right, of some of the issues that one have to face in practical terms. In terms of the dealing with the private sector, if anything, I think this is an area where there is a real convergence between private sector and government. Why? Is because simply by the fact that private sector manufacturers are increasingly under pressure to do this. As you mentioned, Minister, there's an expectation that already in the tech industry, products are built to be able to be disassembled, and I think there's progress, and you'll be able to tell us more about that potentially. But there's progress, but we're still not quite there yet. And so, what we have found is tremendous enthusiasm by the tech industry, especially in the United States, to work on this, because they really want to show that they are making efforts in this direction. And they need to be supported by potentially organizations such as ours, who understand, who've got a wider view, if you like, of some of the challenges in the supply chain, and can act as an impartial entity to actually make this agenda move forward. So I'm quite hopeful that we will be able to make progress, and we really be able to rally the tech industry, and potentially then in other domains to play a real active role.
Thanks a lot, Philippe, and amen to that. I would like to open for comments from the floor now, and I thought it would be useful for me to ask you a question and provide some sort of a framing, and then for you to contribute what you think about that. And it can be anything. If you have ordered a laptop and that has been stuck for 6 weeks, feel free to share your sub story as well. I'm sure a lot of us have tried to be sustainable consumers, and that has had some barriers, and now thanks to Philippe, why that might be the case. So I thought of framing it as where the biggest potential you see for public-private cooperation in moving the development, circularity, trade agenda forward. Do feel free to raise your hand, and we'll help you with the mic. We have one in the front. Introduce yourself, please, before you speak.
Yes, hello. My name is Malena Sell, and I work for the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Unit for Sustainable Trade. I think that there are many areas where we need the private and public sector to work together. Right now, we're at the very early stages of developing digital product passports. These will be helpful in a customs situation as well, but we have to ensure that they will be developed in a way that is inclusive and that really understands how business works. I mean, I represent the government, but I know that this is something that government can never do alone. We definitely need to hear from all of our businesses and different types of businesses, big, small, SMEs, et cetera, so that we get an instrument that is workable and an instrument that is streamlined and efficient as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Malena. We have Carolyn.
Thank you very much. Carolyn Diabebek from the Forum on Trade, Environment and SDGs. One of the reflections I have, Jeet, is when we speak with developing countries about circular economy and trade, one of the key issues that they emphasize is the challenges with getting investment and finance in some of these solutions, so that whilst there's a strong interest in being part of some of these supply chains and so on. For many companies, it's simply a question, I think this applies to sustainable trade in general, is that both the government and also the businesses need to have, easier and more affordable access to finance on the global markets. And this is especially challenging for some of the MSMEs, which are those that are the most innovative and most likely to try and get into some of these new markets. So I think that's something that we need to bear in mind. And also when it comes to some of the new technologies like those that Malena mentioned, or the innovative ways of trying to facilitate trade, they may not always have easy access or to be able to afford or to buy those. So that's the second area. It's not a case against trying. It's just to say these are enabling things we need to think about. And the third is that it's just that regulatory capacity around the circular economy, because there's a push to promote circularity and to facilitate circular trade, but also for many countries, part of the ways they incentivize that is to regulate the stuff that they don't want. So products that are harmful to the environment or aren't well designed or aren't recyclable or have harmful additives or chemicals in there or whatever. So there's sort of there's the promoting and facilitating the circular side, but part of that's also by setting the rules of the game and having the regulatory capacity as well. So I just thought it would be useful to reflect, hopefully, on some of that.
Thanks. So could I do the gentleman in front and then Christophe and then Mr. Mehta, just so we have everyone speak as well. But eager to hear from all of you. And thanks, Carolyn, for the framing in 3 points. Very useful.
I would like just to direct attention to the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which I don't represent, but they have done great work on, in fact, circular economy, and they have a large database of different industries in which circular economy exists. This is number one. Number two, I think we should also direct attention to circular economy stakeholders which exist in the European Union in Brussels. And it's a large group that in fact they're developing policies and so on in general in the EU. And they are very innovative in terms of directing attention to really a huge changes in the industries, different kind of industries and so on. So we have to direct attention to that as well. And then in October, there was in Crete, the biggest, in fact, meeting for engineers, and it was about circular economy. That is how engineers can contribute to it and so on. And I also happen to be a presenter there. I'm an expert also in circular economy. And we presented, in fact, the changes of the way in which you construct roads. And there are many examples of how you can construct roads and enable the roads to be built in a circular way, totally circular way, and so on. And it exists now in Germany, in different places. So I think that this kind of information also has to be part of the discussion that we have here. So the UNECE, which I don't represent, they're a great player on the changing in fact, education system on that. It's Dr. Adam. I'm from Israel. I'm a ESG expert, and also I'm teaching in a university there. Thank you.
Thank you. Just maybe one question, and you can help me, understand this. Well, of course, I think, all the issues that you face in circular economy tend to be very sector specific. And when you talk about textiles, it's not the same as plastics or e-waste. But there's been one issue that has been, puzzling me. It's this, increasingly there is this idea of extended producer responsibility. So you have these EPR schemes that are being developed, and which should provide the kind of right incentives in a way, particularly for kind of an end of life, dealing with the end of life of products. But these schemes are really designed nationally and designed to be applied in a national way. Now, if we're thinking about developing reverse supply chains that are effective, that are global, and that are probably going cross-border, how do we ensure that those EPR fees get or actually follow the structure of the supply chains? And I haven't really heard any response on how to do it very much in practice. But I think this is probably a key area when we think about trade and trade facilitation of those supply chains. So any insights on how to do it would be very welcome.
Maybe I can comment, and thank you for your question, because the UAE is currently working on EPR. It's supposed to come into effect in 2026, but then also talking about circular economy and reverse supply chains. The cost and where it's split, I think, depends on the country's scheme of how they want to implement the EPR. Is the EPR going to be, for instance, in the UAE? They haven't chosen yet, but we are recommending that it is a private-public-led EPR scheme and PRO, rather than maybe how Saudi is looking at it as a completely publicly run EPR system and PRO. So when we talk about reverse supply chains, initially we want each consumer and individual and entity who lives in a specific city or country to put back materials in the right place to separate at source. But then beyond the consumer just doing that, the waste management companies need to be obliged to continue that separated scheme. For an example here, if I separate at home, the municipality truck passes by and throws everything in one chute in a dump. So all my efforts went to waste. Some communities have separated bins, some don't. And so how does that then meet the supply chain in terms of waste management company going back to its recovery facility, baling those materials, selling it to local or national suppliers, and then retrieving recycled materials? Now, if these materials are produced abroad, this is where a tool like Digital Passport will come into effect, because you know that, okay, although I recycled polypropylene in Sharjah in the UAE, Japan bought it for Toyota's car, for an example. So this is the reverse supply chain circular economy logic. The way EPR can come into emergence, or how they can complement each other, is that EPR will set the financial capacity, which you were mentioning in terms of there is a lack of funding. So how can we make sure that the EPR and PRO schemes enable that gap to be missed? Today, for instance, HDPE is in very high demand, especially in our region. HDPE milk bottles has buyers listed and waiting to just get their hands on it. But if you go to a waste management company, they'll tell you, I can sell you a mixed HDPE bale for 800 dirhams, for an example, a ton. But if you want the milk bottles alone, pay me 500 extra a ton, because it's not my job initially to separate those. So maybe that 500 extra dirhams can be covered by schemes that are set by EPR. So I think EPR is mainly a way and a tool to finance things similar to the credit logic, but not really. But at least on a supply chain level, it can have that impact, where the waste management companies and recyclers get certain fundings to perform the job without having to put all of the cost on the buyer. I hope that maybe gives you a reflection.
The question is, what happens if the recycling part happens in a third country?
Yeah, so if there's...
Where does the fee follows or gets...
But depends what you mean... But depends what you mean by... So you can recycle materials in different forms. So if you flake it here and then granulate it somewhere else, or if the granule gets turned into fiber somewhere else and then that yarn gets sold in another. So tracking these materials, very difficult. And I think Malena also agrees on the fact that it's not easy to create a tracking system where you can continuously track the same material. But yes, maybe having a consolidated database, knowing which material left to what for which repurposing, and then it would usually end there. So EPR would not follow on that. It would then enter that national scale economy and contribute to its own third GDP.
Perhaps on this EPR scheme, because indeed that's a very important element. One way you could potentially do it is a little bit like you do it with VAT, where basically when you're exporting, you're getting reimbursed or you don't pay the EPR, and then you pay it on import, right? And use customs to manage that. I think that could be a practical way of doing it. It's a process that exists for fiscal purposes, and ideally then you get into a situation where the country that is receiving the money is able to reinvest this into recycling plants. And I think this is a concept that has been floating around for a while. There are some companies out there that have been thinking about how to do that. It's probably worth discussing in more detail. Now this is much more upstream. You're in the policy area here, and this is for the WTO negotiators to agree in terms of from a policy perspective, and then pass it over to organizations like us to sort of implement this. But I think we're still a long way off.
Thanks a lot. Before I move on to the last question from the audience, thanks a lot, Christoph, for that question. It's very, I think, a practical difficulty that we are facing, and thanks for sharing your insights on how the plastics sphere could look at it, and Philippe for talking about the cascading aspect of it. Just one comment to your question. I think this is something that we are seeing increasingly in textiles also, for example, given the volume, the quantum of secondhand textiles moving across countries. There is no clear answer to that question, which is what makes it all the more important. But I do think some sort of a supranational EPR has seemed a lot of currency in certain academic circles as one of the solutions. And what Philippe's point was, I think that could be another way of looking at it. And there is practical precedence in implementing some sort of a solution like that. So those 2 points would be something to look at, I guess. The last comment from the audience, and I would like to request you to please keep it short.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I just wanted to understand, how do you define EPR? You were looking at it as a fiscal instrument. I thought it is extended producer responsibility towards the warranty or guarantee for performance of the product.
I think there's a number of ways of looking at it. At some point, there is some form of charge or fee that is associated to a product, which is supposed to be used then for the actual recycling process.
Thank you. Now, Auditor, going on from the point which you made, and this is something which strikes me as something as a part of circular trade facilitation, rather than circular economy per se. Textiles, clothing, second-hand clothing moves around the world. It is imported into India also. It is sold to the poor. For example, a lot of it is sold to the poor, and a lot of it is shredded and recycled into further textiles. But what is interesting to study is, and particularly when I question about EPR, is to look at the automobile sector. In large parts of the world, second-hand automobiles are imported because they're less costly, particularly Africa, for example. India doesn't allow import of second-hand vehicles, though you can do domestic trading of second-hand vehicles. And the interesting part is that in India, the second-hand vehicles are sold by either a merchant workshop, or the company itself. Then the company extends the warranty as well. It's fine, we're refurbishing the car, and we'll give you another 3 years warranty on what we are selling. Their prices are a little higher than what the market would sell. I mean, a merchant workshop, for example. Now, that could be an interesting area to study, automobile sector itself. It's a very large area of trade facilitation, which is, happening in the world. That will give us a lot of insights about the issues that we are talking about. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And of course, automobiles are also up there together with textiles and plastics and electronic waste in terms of the maturity of the discussions around circular economy and circular value chains. We are running slightly behind schedule, so I would just turn to my panelists, starting with you, Minister, and request you for a rapid-fire 1-minute top takeaways from the panel.
Well, I think the discussion does highlight the complexity of the issue, and as a lawyer, I tend to maybe analyze the legal options here, because because you either have a national, and we do want to have to keep the national jurisdiction, but the basis of national legislation has to be that you have a certain level of environmental understanding on the legislation. So you do need some bottom framework to have the legal rules for each country. But then when we want the widespread, the circular economy, we are looking at whether how can we use through customs or whether what international framework shall we use. European Union, kind of easy because European Union they can make legislation right away for all the European nations, but it's been difficult because it usually gets quite complex and not always the best possible outcome. But at least they are trying, so we can conclude that it's a good thing that each organization is trying. Overall, I'd get back to the listening to companies and the competitiveness of this all, because way beyond legal framework, these solutions will become a more dominant one whenever they are affordable. So that's why the research and development is important, and considering some of the raw materials, I know that there is a way to make them more affordable or more competitive. But each country is unique. Without saying it goes that India's situation is perhaps different from like a situation in Finland, for example, on how you can recycle some of these bigger electronics, for example. But when each country takes its strengths, I think there will be new solutions which are then applicable for all. I don't know if it makes any sense to you, but this is the framework I have in mind. And Professor had a good expertise eye on this topic as well. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Minister, for explaining that in legalese. It was very clear. Moving to you, Philippe. Quick takeaway.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think what's quite interesting from this discussion, the various discussions we've been having, is that we're only at the start of a hopefully not too long, but a reasonably long journey. That awareness is picking up rapidly, especially within the private sector. I think governments, from a public policy perspective, need to start accelerating that process as well, because the gains are tremendous and the issues are even bigger. And I think the quicker, as a community, we're able to get ourselves organized, government, private sector working together in order to be able to establish some policies and some projects to be able to move this forward, the better for everybody.
Thanks a lot, Philippe. Mariam, you have the last word.
To keep it very short and reflect on also what Philippe said, I think my takeaway is always to look at who will end up using which material, but who's going to pay for it, and will governments have any role in that, depending on the material, of course. So that analysis is always what I think keeps my curiosity turned on. And thank you so much for sharing and asking the questions as well. Thanks, Jeet.
Thanks a lot to my panelists for very succinctly summarizing, and this was my lazy way of making my panel do the closing remarks instead of having to bottle all of these wonderful insights. A special thanks also to all the intelligence and the insights that we had from the audience. That was quite refreshing. I think we had, it was quite productive to hear about your own experiences and your own journeys in the different sectors. And I would like to end by thanking our organizers, IIST, for the support, and we hope that you stick around to listen to some of the other wonderful sessions here. Thank you.